Hello, everyone, and welcome to another edition of the African American Affairs Lunch and Learn. My name is Stacy Nell. I'm the Executive Director of the Kansas African American Affairs Commission. Today, it is just me. It's just me. I don't have a guest because I wanted to take some time today to go over the ballot. As you may or may not know, there's an election coming up. I think everyone probably knows that there's an election coming up. So I wanted to talk about things that are going to be on the ballot outside of the presidential election. It's getting a lot of attention up at the top of the ticket, but there's a lot going on down the ballot. And so I wanted to take some time today to talk about the ballot that's going on in Kansas. So here we go. A little voter education 101. So first thing to note is that the date of the general election is Tuesday, November 5th. First Tuesday of November. And we're already past the primary. We're into the general election session. And so the November 5th is the election. Now, in many places around Kansas, there is early voting. I know for a fact that in Miami County, early voting starts today. I know in Johnson County, early voting starts this coming October 19th. So pay attention to your local area in terms of when early voting may start for you. Here's something that I find myself saying to as many people who will listen to me. Elections are determined by the people who actually show up. A lot of people have opinions about politics and elected officials and candidates and politicians, but not everyone shows up to vote. And so I really want to encourage everyone, and especially our community, to make sure that we show up to vote, and in large numbers. The history of voting, I really truly think that a lot of people think that, oh, this is, I've always been able to vote, and they take things completely for granted. So I just wanted to talk a little bit about, what the founding fathers thought about voting. Really, in the beginning of this country, only land-owning white men were allowed to vote. So even if you were a white man, if you didn't own land, you weren't allowed to vote, much less if you were a woman, much less if you were a person of color. Only land-owning white men were allowed to vote. So ever since the founding of this country, it's been this push towards allowing more people to vote, to get access to the ballot to more people. In 1870, it was the 15th Amendment that allowed Black men to get the vote. In 1920, it allowed the 19th Amendment, allowed white women to get the vote. Of course, there was the Voting Rights Act of 1965 that broke down more barriers to access to the ballot box. And then in 1971, the 26th Amendment to the Constitution set the voting age down at 18. I believe at that point, the logic was if an 18-year-old could be drafted to go into war, they should definitely be allowed to vote for the president who might be sending them to war. But what we continue to see is that even though a lot of barriers to voting have been brought down over the history of our nation, there are still barriers to vote that persist, and new ones can get thrown up at all times. So we should never take our right to vote for granted. So where does the power lie? These are a couple of things that I hear a lot in my visiting around the state, or just talking to friends, quite frankly. I hear that politicians are crooked. I hear politicians, no, they just don't get us. I hear a lot, oh, they lie to get elected and then they flake. Or I hear that they're only in it for the money, which is laughable at the Kansas legislative session level. But here's the thing I really want to impress upon everyone. Politicians are elected by the people. I do not believe in Kansas that there has been widespread voter indiscrepancies or voter fraud, or I believe our elections have been safe and secure and valid. So if we as the populace are going to complain about a certain segment of elected officials, these people were elected. These people got more votes than other people. So I cannot impress that enough, that the power actually does not lie with the politicians. The power lies with the people who are voting for them. So when we don't vote as a community, and I'm talking primarily as the Black community, when we don't vote as a community, we are giving up our power willingly, just surrendering our power to someone else. So I would like to encourage us not to do that. So let's get to what is on the ballot. Yes, there are some national level races. Obviously, the one that's getting a lot of the attention is the President of the United States race. There's a presidential election every 4 years. And presidents are term limited to 2 terms. So in total, a president can only serve for 8 years. And now, I was going to do this video a while ago, and then of course there were shakeups at the top of the ticket. Now it's Kamala Harris and Tim Walz on the Democratic side, and Donald Trump and J.D. Vance on the Republican side. So now the ticket has been set. Now, here's the thing about the presidential election. It is not officially done by a popular vote. It's done by the Electoral College, where most states, not all, but most states give their electors, depending on who wins the popular vote in that state. Kansas is an all or nothing state. So whoever wins gets all 6 of Kansas elector, I think it's 6 Kansas elector votes. Not all states are that way. But because of that, a person may win the popular vote, but not win the Electoral College vote. And so that has happened. That's happened twice in my lifetime, y'all, which seems to be a bit much, where a person can get more votes across the country, but lose in the Electoral College and wind up not being president. That's not the topic of this particular Lunch and Learn, but it has happened. And so the magic number is not do you win the popular vote, is that can you get to 270 electoral votes? In the United States Senate, there are 100 senators in the United States Senate. There's 2 per state, and they serve 6-year terms. A third of the Senate is up every 4 years. But so that means that this cycle, there's no actual senators on the ballot from Kansas. So I want to toss that out. At times, the United States Senate will be on our ballot, but right now, they're not. But the United States House of Representatives, they are up every 2 years, and they will be on our ballot. Kansas is divided into 4 congressional districts, the big congressional districts. United States congressmen serve 2-year terms. And District 1, the race has been settled. It's going to be Tracy Mann, the Republican incumbent, against Paul Buskirk, who's the Democratic challenger. In District 2, it is an open seat, and it's going to be Derek Schmidt, the Republican, versus Nancy Boyda, the Democrat. In District 3, Sharice Davids is the Democratic incumbent, going up against Prasnath Reddy, who is a Republican challenger. And in District 4, Ron Estes is the Republican incumbent, being challenged by Democrat Esau Freeman. So depending on where you live in the state, your race will look different at the United States House of Representatives level. There are a lot of state level races as well. So we just talked about the national level races. Now we get down to the state level races. The entire Kansas legislature is up for election this year. So the entire Kansas State Senate, there are 40 senators in the Kansas State Senate. They serve 4-year terms, and it's currently the balance is that there are 29 Republicans and 11 Democrats. Now, the Kansas State Senate, there's only 40 versus in my next slide, I'll show you the Kansas House of Representatives. There are 125. It's because the Senate districts are larger in population than the House of Representative districts, if that makes sense. So the state of Kansas, and so it's not based on geographic largeness, it's based on the number of people who live in a particular district. So in both the House of Representatives and in the Kansas State Senate, for example, highly populated areas, Sedgwick County, Johnson County, there may be several House and Senate districts within that county. But if we go further west, if we get into Geary County, a Senate district may be 8 counties, because it's not about geographic size, it's about population. That's what I mean by say when the district size is determined by population versus geographic size. So there's 125 seats. Everyone's up in the Kansas House of Representatives. Currently, right now, there's 85 Republicans and 40 Democrats in the House of Representatives. Also, in terms of statewide races, well, not truly statewide races, but races that are going on across the state, which may impact you. The Kansas State Board of Education, they have 10 seats, and every couple of years, 5 of them are up. So right now, it's all the even, District 2, 4, 6, 8, and 10. So I wanted to read this because there was sometimes there's confusion. The mission of the State Board of Education is to prepare Kansas students for lifelong success through rigorous quality academic instruction, career training, and character development according to each student's gifts and talents. So they set the academic standards for the state. These are not the people who set any actual local curriculum. Those decisions are made by local school boards, and school boards are not up for election in even years. School boards tend to be up for election in odd years. So 2021, 2023, 2025, as opposed to 2020, 2022, 2024. So odd year elections. But the State Board of Education is up. Like I said, the even number districts. District 2, Melanie Haas is the Democratic incumbent running against Fred Postlewaite. District 4, Chris Myers challenging Connie O'Brien. District 6, Dr. Beryl New is a Democrat challenging Bruce Schultz. I know Dr. Beryl New. She serves on the Kansas African American Affairs Commission. That is not me endorsing. It's just me saying that she's got a tie to this commission as well. District 8, Betty Arnold, Democrat versus Jason Carmichael, the Republican. And District 10, Debbie Potter, Republican versus Jeremy Jarman, who's the Democrat. So the Kansas State Board of Education districts are even larger than the Senate districts because each Board of Education region is made up by 4 Senate districts. So the geographic unit for the Kansas Board of Education is rather large. Yes, let's continue on. Now, there is many times, and they're depending on where you live, and so that's why I'll get to my next slide, is that you have to read your ballot closely. There may or may not be questions of the retention of judges. Everything from district court, magistrate judges, county district attorneys. Depending on where you live, I couldn't make a slide talking about the entire state because there's wide variation. So what I will ask you to do is go to the Kansas Secretary of State's resource. You can look up your individual ballot. So myvoteinfo.voteks.org/voterview. That is actually an invaluable resource to give us information about what's on your ballot. If you go to that resource, and I'll put it in the notes and put it in the show notes and all the things, you can input your birthday, your address, and it will tell you who's on your individual ballot. So if you live in Liberal, Kansas, you can find your ballot. If you live in Lenexa, you can find your ballot. So that's one of those things where, and I oftentimes do this. I will look up my ballot, then I can actually print my ballot off. Now I should say it's a sample ballot, and it'll say very clearly sample. So I should make pains to say that I can print off a sample ballot. Okay. Then I can take my sample ballot and do some research, Google people, look up their stances on different positions. So getting a sample ballot, looking up your sample ballot is an excellent way of being able to take some time ahead of time to make an informed decision about who you're voting for. So I would toss that out there. It's also helpful because sometimes there's these races that like county commission. I know in Johnson County, there's a couple county commission races up. So it's hard for me just sitting in one spot to know what's on everyone's ballot across the state. So take some time to go to VoterView and look up your ballot. There's actually a couple different places you can go look up your ballot. But here's what I want to skip the timeline. Here we go. Timeline for the general. If you have not registered to vote for the general election, that deadline was yesterday. That ship has sailed. But if you requested an advance ballot, sometimes those are called mail-in ballots. If you requested an advance ballot, those are going to start to be mailed out today. And you can track that on the Secretary of State's page. Here's one thing that if you've watched any of these shows before, any of these little blurbs before, I've interviewed Secretary of State Scott Schwab twice, and he stresses, and I stress, and I think if this is the other thing I tell everyone, if you have an advance or mail-in ballot, if you absolutely need to put it in the mail, put it in the mail as soon as possible. But if at all possible, do not mail it back. If you have the ability to return it to the election office, you can return it to any early voting poll location. They will accept those mail-in ballots. On election day, you can return a mail ballot to any polling location. So the first thing I would say is, if at all possible, return that or to a drop box. Return that physically. Do not put it in the mail. If you are in a situation where you absolutely have to put it in the mail, put it in the mail as soon as possible. I cannot stress that enough. The mail is running a little slower than what we would like it to be. And then besides that, there's almost I don't know if any of the mail in Kansas is processed in Kansas. All of our mail is sent to other states to be processed before it actually gets delivered. So, yeah, without beating a dead horse, I would say if you have an advance ballot, make plans to return it in person physically. You can return someone else's ballot. Just make sure that you read all the instructions on the outside of that ballot and sign to say that you're returning someone else's ballot. So that's possible, but just make a plan. Start thinking about that now. Start thinking about that now. If you have an advance slash, sometimes referred to as a mail-in ballot, start considering now how you're going to return that. And only at the last resort would I'd say putting that in the mail. Because let's face it, the mail's going slow and there's going to be a lot of mail at this point. So please. Early voting has started. Like I said, early voting started in some counties today. It will be continue to start sort of at a staggered running up into the election. If at all possible, I encourage you to vote in person early. A couple of reasons why. Election day in a presidential year, turnout is always extremely high. There's been so much focus on the presidential election this year. You know, you can read in the news, so many millions of people have registered to vote, and there's all this excitement around the presidential election that we know turnout is going to be very high for the sake of people coming to vote for the presidential election. Wow, one, I've just told you all the reasons why you should pay attention to down ballot races. It's potential that on that Tuesday, November 5th, there's going to be a line. And it may be that you're like, I'm going to go vote before work. But if you're in a line and you have to get to work at 9, you're like, oh, I have to get out. And then what happens if you don't make it to your lunch or if you don't make it right after work? If you can vote early, you will avoid having to wait in line on that Tuesday and have the potential of that line being too long for you to be able to stand and wait in it. Also, that Tuesday is going to be very crowded, which produces lots of stress for everyone involved. Stress for the people who are in line, stress for the people who have graciously given up their time to be poll workers. So these are people who are often volunteering their time to help make sure that the election runs smoothly. Poll workers have come under increasing amounts of pressure over the most recent couple of election cycles. And these are our friends and neighbors who are just giving of their time to help our election run smoothly. So if we can reduce the stress on that Tuesday, it helps them. It helps them stay sane. It helps them. It's like a little gracious thing we can do to help the people who are helping us have a good election. For me, I tend to vote. So I live in Johnson County. Early voting is going to start this Saturday. I'll probably go, honestly, on Monday or Tuesday. You go like in 2 p.m. There's never a line. Right. Although, I remember this 4 years ago, there was a slight line, even on that random Tuesday and, at 3 p.m, which showed me I'm glad I was coming on some random day. Right. Rather than waiting for election day. 2 years ago. And it was just 2 years ago. Was it just 2 years ago? Yes. 2 years ago. We know that on election day, there's going to be lines. And so we were getting reports of lines in Wyandotte County or in Sedgwick County that the wait could be an hour long. And again, the idea that someone would be standing in line and think, oh, this line is too long. I don't have the time. I don't have the patience. Maybe someone doesn't have the actual physical ability to stand in line for that long. And the idea that someone would get out of line and not vote is enough that's the kind of stuff that keeps me awake at night. So I always encourage people as much as possible, if your county has early in-person voting, to utilize that as a way to reduce the lines, reduce the waits, reduce the pressure of what happens on election day. Lastly, even this year, we always go vote early. My husband and I drag the kids and we all go. My kids are too young to vote, but I take them with me. And then on the actual primary day, my husband had COVID. So if we had waited and said, oh, we'll vote on primary election day, he would not have been able to vote because he was sick. So another reason why you should not wait and just assume, oh, I'll just do it on November 5th. We're in Kansas, y'all. There could be a snowstorm on November 5th. So there, I've beat the dead horse. Please go vote early. So as I was talking about, if you wanted to look up your people who are on your ballot, ballotpedia.org is a wonderful resource. Vote411.org is a wonderful resource. Again, these are all places where you can research people and find out who's on your ballot. Your county election offices will also have details about your specific voting location. And if on the day, on election day or anytime, if you notice you go to vote and there's any irregularities or intimidation, or if you don't feel as though you're being welcomed, and by that I know that sometimes there were reports, although it won't happen because there's going to be different people on the ballot for a sheriff in Johnson County, where they were going to deploy sheriff's deputies to polling locations just to provide extra security. But for certain people, if there's a bunch of cops standing around a polling location, that is an intimidation factor that might dissuade some people from coming to exercise their right to vote. So if there's intimidation factors, I don't want to speculate or put words in people's mouth, but if you see anything irregular, you can contact 866-OurVote.org to report irregularities, because we also don't need voting intimidation. All right, so kind of a shorter little segment today. Friends don't let friends skip elections. Okay, so talk to your friends. Make sure you're if you've got a kid who just turned 18, and if they were registered, make sure they vote. If you've got a mom you need to drive to the polling location, if your next door neighbor, talk to your people and make sure that they have a plan to vote. This is going to be, I know we hear it all the time, that this is one of the most important elections of our lifetime. I don't know, because if I say this now, in 2 years, we'll be saying the exact same thing again. But this is a pretty important election. So I really do want everyone to take an opportunity to think about how you're going to vote. Where are you going to vote? Are you going to vote early? Where are you going to return your mail-in ballot? These are the things that are important to us right now. Excuse me. All right, that's it for today. A little shorter of a program. I want to wish everyone well as you make your plans to go vote. All right, thanks. Bye.